Hi guys, and welcome to Quiet Voice Podcast Channel. Tonight we step into the wet, shimmering low country of South Carolina, where the moon hangs above black water and the reeds whisper in the dark. You stand at the edge of a rice plantation in the year 1800, and at first it almost looks peaceful. The air is warm. Frogs call from the marsh. A slow breeze stirs the grass. Yet this quiet landscape hides one of the harshest labour systems in early America. A world built on skill, violence, disease, and endless damp exhaustion. What did it really feel like to live here? To wake before sunrise in a place where wealth rose from mud and suffering? And what truths were carefully hidden behind the polished tables of Charleston and the grand fortunes of planters? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And while you are here, comment with your location and local time. Now, dim the lights. And you begin with the land itself, because the land decides nearly everything. You stand in a country that feels half water, half earth. The coast of South Carolina stretches in a maze of tidal rivers, creeks, swamps, and flat islands where fresh water and salt water seem to argue all day. The ground under your feet is soft and dark. It gives a little when you step. The smell is rich and sour at once, part wet soil, part green growth, part standing water that has been warming under the sun for hours. Insects hum so steadily that silence almost disappears. By 1800, this region has become one of the richest plantation zones in North America. Rice is the reason. It is not grown in neat, dry rows like a pleasant garden vegetable. It is grown in flooded fields that must be cut, banked, drained, and managed with extraordinary care. Planters love to describe themselves as masters of improvement, men of refinement, men of business, very elegant, very proud. Yet the real intelligence of the rice world lives in the labour of black people. Many of them descended from West and Central Africans, whose communities knew wetland farming long before Carolina planters grew rich from it. You move closer to the fields at dawn, when the day begins to reveal its shape. Mist hangs low over the water. The banks divide the plantation into rectangles and long shining reaches, as if the swamp has been forced into geometry. Wooden floodgates control the tide. Canals carry water where it must go. Everything here has to be measured against the movement of rivers and the pull of the moon. A rice plantation is not simply a farm. It is a machine laid over a swamp, and every part of that machine depends on human bodies. The first sounds of morning come in layers. You hear birds chattering from the reeds. You hear the squish of feet in mud. You hear a tool strike wood somewhere in the half-light. Then voices, low at first, then clearer. A child crying briefly, a woman calling out, a man clearing his throat after sleep. Day is arriving. There is work to do. There is always work to do. For the enslaved people who live here, the plantation is both workplace and trap. The cabins stand apart from the planter's house, usually in a row or cluster on slightly higher ground. They are simple structures of wood, clay, or tabby, often patched and repaired as materials allow. Inside, the air can feel close and heavy, especially in warm weather. Smoke from the cooking fire clings to the rafters and to cloth. Bedding is rough. Floors are plain. Privacy is scarce. Yet within these tight spaces, people build family life, memory, belief, and fragments of comfort that the system never intended them to have. When morning begins, the body feels the plantation before the mind fully wakes. Skin is damp almost at once. Clothes cling. Mosquitoes find any bare patch. The smell of ash from last night's fire mixes with boiling cornmeal, with saltfish, with the sharp odour of marsh water nearby. You rub sleep from your eyes and feel the ache in your legs, your lower back, your shoulders. These are common companions here. So are fever and fatigue. Rice cultivation is seasonal, and each stage brings different demands. Fields must be cleared, earth must be heaped into banks, ditches and trunks, The wooden water controls must be maintained, seed must be sown, water levels must be watched carefully, weeds must be cut back. Later the rice is harvested, threshed, pounded, and prepared for market. None of this is gentle work. Wet mud sucks at ankles. Sun presses down with a hard hand. Tools blister the palms. Even skilled, practiced motion carries strain. The low-country planter class likes to imagine the landscape as conquered nature. Historians generally agree that the region's great rice fortunes depended on this transformed wetland environment and on enslaved labour organised at scale. Yet historians still argue whether planters consciously sought captives from specific African rice-growing regions as often as later tradition claimed, or whether that connection, while real, was more uneven and opportunistic than planters admitted. Either way, African knowledge mattered enormously. Water control, planting rhythm, and processing methods did not appear by magic from a silk waistcoat. You can feel that expertise in the fields. The work requires timing, judgment, and observation. It is not random exertion. A person must know when a bank is weakening, when standing water is wrong, when the rice head is ready, when a change in weather will alter everything. This deep practical knowledge sits in sharp contrast to the legal reality of enslavement, where the people who know the land best are denied ownership of their own labour, their time, and their children. South Carolina in 1800 is a place where black people form the majority in many low-country areas. On some plantations, enslaved people far outnumber whites. This shapes daily life in ways both obvious and subtle. Many planters do not even stay year-round on the plantation. Some spend much of their time in Charleston or elsewhere, especially during the sickliest months, leaving overseers, drivers, and trusted managers to control operations. It is a revealing arrangement. The men who claim mastery over the swamp are often quite happy to escape it when the fevers rise. That contrast tells you almost everything. Wealth sits at a distance from labour. Comfort sits at a distance from danger. White households may still suffer illness, but enslaved workers bear the greater burden of constant exposure. They stand in water, clear ditches, breathe the rot of marsh edges, and sleep in quarters close to the very conditions that spread disease. Malaria and other fevers haunt the rice coast. So do intestinal illnesses, infections, and the slow weakening that comes from hard labour combined with poor nutrition. Death is not dramatic every hour. It is more constant than that. It lingers in the background like humidity. A quirky detail survives in plantation records and traveller accounts. Some visitors describe the rice fields as beautiful from a distance, especially in certain light, when they shimmered like mirrors or silk. It is the kind of observation that makes you want to raise an eyebrow in the dark. Beautiful, yes, if you are not the one ankle deep in warm mud while mosquitoes celebrate your existence. The social world of the plantation begins taking shape as the sun rises higher. There is hierarchy everywhere, the planter family at the top, overseers and managers enforcing discipline, drivers, often enslaved men placed in positions of authority over work gangs, navigating a cruel and dangerous middle ground, field hands, skilled workers, children carrying water or minding younger siblings, elderly people whose labour may shift but whose value to family and community remains deep. No two lives are identical here. Age, health, skill, gender, and the size of the plantation all alter the daily experience. You notice clothing next. Fabric is coarse, linen, wool, osnaburg, rough cotton. Garments are practical and often worn thin. Shoes may be scarce, especially in warm months or muddy conditions where they are difficult to keep. Skin shines with sweat. Sleeves are rolled. Head wraps protect from sun and help manage hair and heat. Hands tell their own history. Scarred knuckles, thickened palms, nails broken short. The day grows louder. Insects rise in clouds from grassy edges. Water laps softly against the banks. Somewhere a wooden gate creaks. Tools move through stalks and weeds with a repetitive swish and chop. Human sound never fully disappears, even when speech stays cautious. Someone laughs for a brief second. Someone sings a fragment too low to catch. Someone mutters a complaint that vanishes into the air. These are small sounds, but they matter. They prove that even under total control, interior life continues. Rice plantations often used what became known as the task system, where individuals or groups received assigned amounts of work for the day, rather than labouring under direct gang supervision from dawn to dusk every minute. In practice, that system varied. It could offer limited room to tend a garden plot, fish, rest briefly, or care for family after tasks were done. It could also be manipulated ruthlessly, with tasks enlarged, conditions worsened, or extra demands added. Freedom did not live inside the task system. At best, it leaked through cracks in it. But on this first approach to plantation life, what strikes you most is the sheer environmental exposure. You're never far from wetness. Even dry boards feel damp by morning. Air presses against the skin like a warm cloth. The light itself seems heavier here, filtered through vapour and leaves. Smell changes by the hour. Fresh-cut vegetation gives off a green scent. Mud releases a mineral odour. Sun-heated water smells thick and stagnant. Smoke from a cook fire drifts low and sweet. Human labour adds salt, leather, iron, and fatigue. Children grow up in this world, absorbing its patterns early. They learn paths between cabins, where snakes may hide, how to carry water without spilling, which adults to avoid when tempers are short, which sounds signal urgency. Some begin work young, though duties differ by age and strength. Their games, when time permits, are shaped by the same landscape of dust, boards, reeds, scraps, and watchful authority. Childhood exists here, but it exists under pressure. Religion and language also move through the quarters in layered ways. By 1800, low-country black communities have formed rich cultural worlds, drawing from African inheritances, local adaptation, and Christian influence. Gula speech develops in this environment, shaped by English and multiple African language roots. The cadence of conversation, the phrasing of stories, the naming of places and people all carry traces of that creative survival. Culture is not a decoration added after labour. It is one of the ways people remain human within a system designed to reduce them to property. As the hours pass, you begin to understand that a rice plantation is built from contradictions. It demands expert knowledge while denying the humanity of the experts. It creates immense luxury through relentless deprivation. It depends on black endurance while treating black life as disposable. It praises order but rests on violence. Even the landscape reflects this contradiction. The fields look controlled, yet the swamp is never fully tamed. Water slips, rots, floods, breeds insects, and reminds everyone that this empire of profit is balanced on unstable ground. You may imagine plantation life as constant motion, but there are strange pauses too. A moment at the edge of a bank, a hand wiping sweat from the neck, a distant stare across shining water. These moments are not leisure. They are breaths taken inside pressure. Sometimes they hold planning, sometimes memory, sometimes nothing but the effort to keep going. And that is the truth settling over you in the Carolina heat. Life for black Americans on rice plantations in 1800 is not defined by one single misery. Though misery is everywhere, it is a total environment. It is the mud at your feet, the fever in your blood, the command in another person's voice, the skill in your hands, the child in the doorway, the smell of smoke on evening cloth, the knowledge that your labour feeds a fortune you will never share. It is deadly not only because the work is hard, but because the whole world around the work has been arranged to drain strength, shorten lives, and turn suffering into elegance for someone else. And still, as the light shifts on the flooded fields, you can sense something the ledgers never capture. People endure here with intelligence, humour, memory, and care for one another, not because the plantation allows dignity, but because dignity survives in spite of it. That quiet fact rests beneath every sound of the morning marsh, steady as the tide itself. By the time daylight fully opens over the low country, the air already feels used. You breathe it in and it seems to have passed through water, leaves, mud, sweat, and smoke before it reaches your lungs. It is thick enough to notice. It settles on your skin almost like another layer of clothing. Nothing here feels crisp. Nothing feels cleanly separate. Land slides into water. Morning slides into heat. Work slides into danger so quietly that a stranger might not recognize where one ends and the other begins. You step farther into the plantation and begin to understand why this place was feared even by many of the people who profited from it. Rice did not flourish on easy ground. It flourished in marshy lowlands, floodable fields, and swampy edges where standing water could be controlled just enough for cultivation. To a planter viewing it from a porch or a boat, this wet world could look like a source of power. To the people forced to labour in it, the same world often felt like a long conversation with sickness. The paths are narrow and soft. Your shoes, if you have them, gather mud quickly. Bare feet feel every change in texture. There is slick clay near the ditch edge, gritty shell in some places, matted grass in others, and then the unpleasant sudden pull of wet ground that seems to grab the ankle and hold on. The mud can be cool at first touch in the early hours. Later it warms, and the warmth is somehow worse. Warm mud feels alive in all the wrong ways. Mosquitoes are everywhere. You hear them before you fully see them. A fine whining sound hangs near the ears and neck. Then the bites begin. Ankles first, wrists, forehead, any patch the cloth leaves exposed. Brushing them away is a reflex, but the relief never lasts. Gnats drift in clouds. Flies circle sweat. Tiny biting things rise from the grass when disturbed. Even stillness has teeth here. The danger is not only annoyance, it sits deeper than that. In the Carolina rice country, fever is part of the ordinary vocabulary of life. People speak of chills, weakness, shaking, heat in the head, pains in the limbs, spells that return, skin turning sallow, eyes growing dull. Malaria stalks the low country in this era. Though people in 1800 do not yet understand mosquitoes in the modern scientific sense, they often blame bad air, marsh vapours, rotting vegetation, night damp, and seasonal corruption rising from the soil. They are wrong about the mechanism, but not wrong about the pattern. The wet fields and slow water are bound tightly to illness. You can see how this shapes behaviour. White planters with money often try to escape during the sickliest months, especially in late summer and early autumn, retreating to Charleston, the Pinelands, or other places thought healthier. The confidence of mastery can become strangely delicate when fever threatens white skin. Enslaved people rarely have that option. Their bodies remain where the labour remains. They plant in the wet season, weed in the wet season, repair banks in the wet season, and sleep close to the same ditches and pools that make disease more likely. The wealthy leave, the workers stay. That is one of the clearest facts in the whole landscape. Heat presses down by midday with a stubborn force that is difficult to describe until you feel it directly. It is not dramatic like a desert sun. It is more enclosing than that. The sky is bright, but the air feels almost indoors, as if the whole plantation has been covered with warm, wet fabric. Sweat begins early and never really stops. Shirts cling to the chest and spine. Head wraps dampen. Hands slip on tool handles. Salt gathers at the temples. The body must keep moving in an atmosphere that seems to resist movement. The smell changes as the temperature rises. Dawn smells of wet grass and cool ash. Noon smells of stagnant ditch water, bruised weeds, warm wood, and bodies working hard under cloth that has already been worn too many days in a row. There is often a sweet note, too, something green and almost pleasant from cut plants or sunlit reeds. That is part of the cruelty of the place. It can smell rich and alive while also carrying sickness. You pass a drainage ditch and notice the water barely moving. The surface looks smooth except where insects touch it. Small life skates and wriggles there. Frogs slip from the bank. A snake may be resting in the grass close enough to miss if your eyes are tired. Alligators are part of the wider low-country world, though they are not the main threat in daily plantation routine. The real menace is smaller, quieter, and more persistent. Fever does not announce itself with a dramatic splash. It comes in the evening, then again next week, then again after that, until strength begins to leak from a person's body like water from a split barrel. Some labourers know the first signs well. A strange chill despite the heat, an ache behind the eyes, a heaviness in the bones, a sudden weakness in the knees. Then comes burning skin, shivering, thirst, confusion, and sometimes collapse. Recovery may be partial. A person can survive yet remain weakened, thin, or easily exhausted. Many do not enjoy the luxury of a full recovery period. Work does not pause because one body is trembling. Rice plantations become especially deadly because the labour itself increases exposure. Workers stand near water, wade through wet ground, clear vegetation along banks, and handle the constant maintenance that keeps flood and drainage systems functioning. The built environment of rice agriculture creates an artificial wetland made for profit, but also a favourable habitat for insects and disease. Historians broadly agree on that deadly connection. What scholars still debate more actively is the precise balance between African-acquired immunities, local birth patterns, seasonal movement, and environmental adaptation in shaping mortality rates. The picture is complicated. The suffering is not. You see evidence of illness in the rhythms of daily life. Some faces look drawn even in youth. Some bodies move with a careful economy, saving strength wherever possible. Elders may carry deep knowledge of herbs, roots, steaming practices, teas, and other treatments used within the quarters. Certain plants are gathered when they can be found. Cool cloths are applied. Prayers are spoken. A person may be sweated under blankets or encouraged to drink bitter infusions. Some remedies soothe. Some do little. Some perhaps help more than outsiders realised. Medical care from planters is inconsistent at best, and often guided more by maintaining labour capacity than by real compassion. A curious detail from the era appears in scattered descriptions of low-country health. Some visitors believed the evening dew itself was dangerous, as though moonlit moisture carried sickness into the body. It sounds almost poetic, which is very convenient when you do not yet grasp insect-borne disease. Yet, in practice, people often did avoid night air and damp exposure because experience taught them that certain times and conditions seem to bring illness closer. Wrong explanation, useful caution. The plantation doctor, when one appears, is not a comforting figure for enslaved people. He may prescribe purges, bleeding, blistering, or doses of mercury-based treatments common in the medical thinking of the time. You can imagine the confidence. You can also imagine the results. Medicine in 1800 often harms as much as it heals. Enslaved people may place greater trust in skilled women and men within their own community, especially those known for practical healing knowledge passed through family lines or blended from African, native, and European traditions. The weather can shift quickly. Thunderheads gather in the afternoon with shocking speed. The light changes first, turning flatter and stranger. Then wind stirs the reeds. Birds go quiet. Rain arrives with force, slapping the water and raising the smell of mud all over again. Clothes soak through in minutes. Work may continue unless the storm is too severe. Then the rain passes and the heat returns, now heavier because everything is steaming. Touch defines so much of this life. You feel wet cloth against the shoulder blades, grit on the palms, a splinter in a gatepost, mud drying and tightening on the calf, bites swelling on the neck, the scrape of rough fabric, the brief coolness of shade beneath a tree line. Even relief is physical and temporary. A little breeze, a cup of water, a minute off your feet. Then the pressure closes again. Children are vulnerable in this environment too. They suffer fevers, stomach sickness, skin irritations, and the hazards of unsafe water. Mothers and older relatives watch them closely when possible, reading signs of illness with practiced worry. Infant and child mortality can be heartbreakingly high in plantation communities, though the records often flatten this reality into numbers and valuations. A ledger may note a loss. A mother feels an absence in her arms, in her sleep, in the doorway at dusk, in every ordinary task afterward. The quarters themselves do not provide strong defense from disease. Cabins can be smoky, crowded, and poorly ventilated. Water sources may be contaminated. Food storage is limited. Clothing and bedding remain damp in humid weather. Vermin find easy shelter. Yet people still clean, patch, sweep, air bedding when they can, and try to make these spaces safer than the system allows. Survival often depends on endless small acts of maintenance. You mend a wall crack. You shake out cloth. You boil what can be boiled. You keep a child away from foul water. You notice who is too quiet today. There is a terrible arithmetic in how planters view this danger. Enslaved labourers are valuable property on paper, but also replaceable within the logic of the system. That contradiction leads to neglect wrapped in self-interest. A planter may complain bitterly about losing a worker to fever while refusing to reduce exposure or improve living conditions in meaningful ways. Human beings become both essential and expendable at once. It is a moral ugliness so common that many who lived inside it barely seem to notice the contradiction. At the same time, low-country plantations develop reputations for being exceptionally unhealthy, even among slave societies already marked by brutality. Rice cultivation demands environmental conditions that intensify risk. Travellers comment on the fevers. Letters mention the sick season. Families plan movements around it. Enslaved communities carry long memories of which months are worst, which parts of the grounds are most dangerous, which sounds in a person's chest should frighten you, which kind of shivering means the night will be bad. You might expect constant panic in such a place, but daily life is rarely lived at the pitch of open terror. It is more wearing than that. People adapt because they must. They recognize symptoms, make guesses, offer remedies, and continue with tasks while hoping this particular ache is only exhaustion. There is courage in that, though it is not the grand heroic kind that paintings like to celebrate. It is the stubborn courage of getting through another humid day, when your body already feels half spent. Toward evening, the plantation softens in appearance without becoming safer. The light turns golden across the flooded fields. Crickets begin. The air may cool only slightly. Smoke rises from cooking fires near the quarters. You can hear low conversation, the clink of a pot, a baby fussing, someone coughing in a way that makes others glance over. Mosquitoes thicken again as daylight fades. Night does not bring peace so much as a change in pressure. There is an emotional burden to this environment that reaches beyond physical sickness. When disease is common, every fever carries memory with it. You remember who did not survive the last bad season. You remember the sound of someone delirious in the next cabin. You remember a burial after heavy rain, the ground difficult to open, the air still buzzing with insects as if nature itself could not be bothered to pause. Grief becomes woven into ordinary weather, and yet people still talk. They still cook. They still tease one another in tired voices. They still braid hair, mend clothing, sing low songs, and hold children close. A person may laugh even while scratching bites along the wrist. That laugh matters. It is not proof that life is easy. It is proof that life continues stubbornly inside deadly conditions. So when you stand in this South Carolina rice world of 1800, you do not merely see hard labour in pretty marshland. You see an environment engineered for wealth and haunted by disease. You see a place where heat, water, insects, and human exploitation work together with terrifying efficiency. The deadliness is not accidental. It grows from choices about where rice will be planted, who will work it, who may escape the sick season, And who must remain in the fields while fever hums unseen in the evening air? You come to understand the plantation most clearly when you watch how time is cut into pieces and handed out by other people. Not by clocks alone, though clocks matter to those who own the land. Not by the natural rhythm of hunger, rain, or tired muscles, though those matter too. Time here is measured in tasks: a field to hoe, a bank to mend, a ditch to clear, a set number of rows to weed, a quantity of rice to pound. The day is not simply long, it is divided, assigned, and watched. This arrangement is often called the task system. On South Carolina rice plantations, many enslaved people receive a specific amount of work to complete, rather than being driven in a single gang under constant direct motion from dawn until dusk. At first glance, some outsiders imagine this sounds almost lenient. That is the sort of misunderstanding that can only survive at a polite distance. A task is not a favour, it is a demand. It is a fixed burden placed on the body with very little room to argue, and the person assigning it holds power over punishment, food, movement, and family life. At sunrise, the instructions begin. An overseer may speak, a driver may relay the order more directly. Drivers are often enslaved men placed in a painful position between planter authority and field labour. They know the work intimately. They know what can be done in a day and what cannot. They may push others because refusal puts them at risk too. It is a cruel arrangement, one that makes survival depend on standing close to power without ever possessing it. Every plantation has its own personalities and tensions, but the structure itself is clear. Someone above decides what must be done. Someone below performs it. You stand near the fields and hear tasks named in the plain language of work. Hoe this quarter, open that trunk, clear this ditch line, cut back those weeds, carry those bundles, repair that weak section of bank before the tide shifts. Nothing sounds dramatic. That is part of the system's cold efficiency. Exploitation often arrives in ordinary verbs. The amount assigned can vary by season, strength, skill, age, and gender. Men may be given one kind of field labour, women another, though the lines are far from gentle or fixed. Children may carry water, pick up loose stalks, watch smaller children, or begin lighter field tasks at ages that would feel shockingly young to modern eyes. Older people may move into specialised or less physically intense work if their bodies can no longer withstand full field labour, though many are expected to contribute as long as they are able. A task system does not erase hierarchy among the enslaved. It sorts and measures everyone. The physical shape of a task matters deeply. A narrow ditch caked with wet soil is different from a dry patch of hoeing ground. A flooded field pulls at the legs and slows every step. Weeding under hot sun feels different from pounding rice in a work building where dust rises and the arms burn with repetition. Even the same task changes with weather. A section of earth that is manageable on one day becomes heavy and stubborn after rain. Mud thickens, tools drag, mosquitoes gather in the shade. The assigned quantity may remain the same while the actual effort doubles. That is one of the sly violences of the system. It pretends to measure labour fairly by amount, yet the lived burden can shift wildly depending on heat, water, illness, pregnancy, injuries, or the simple randomness of the land itself. Historians often note that the task system offered enslaved people slightly more control over their pace once assigned work was completed, especially compared with gang systems common in some other plantation zones. But scholars also stress that this limited flexibility existed entirely within slavery's coercive frame. A person could move faster and gain a little time. Yes, a person could also be overtasked, watched closely, or punished if the assigned labour was judged incomplete. The narrow space inside the system was real. So was the trap around it. You notice how much judgment is involved in setting a task. Someone decides what counts as reasonable. Someone decides what counts as laziness. Someone decides whether a complaint is honest fatigue or defiance. Those decisions are made in a world where black suffering is routinely discounted. A swollen ankle may be treated as excuse-making. A fever may be treated as slowness. Pregnancy may not reduce the demand enough. A child caring for a sick relative may still be expected to finish the assigned work. The plantation likes exact units when counting labour, but it is conveniently vague when counting pain. Still, the task system produces a peculiar kind of daily suspense. You work knowing that a threshold exists. Finish the rows, clear the ditch, carry the load. When it is done, the shape of the evening changes. Not freedom. Never that. But some hours may open. Those hours are precious. They are used for cooking, mending, tending a small garden plot, fishing, hunting small game, caring for children, visiting kin on the same plantation, praying, making baskets, or simply sitting for a minute with aching legs extended in the dust. The time after tasks is one of the few places where a person can direct energy toward life, rather than only toward the master's profit. That is why task completion becomes more than labour. It becomes a struggle over stolen time. You can feel the tension in the pace people choose. Some move steadily and conserve strength, knowing that frantic effort early in the morning can leave the body empty by midday. Some work in pairs or loose cooperation when the task allows it, sharing rhythm, exchanging quiet remarks, helping one another judge how much remains. Some may rush a portion to gain later hours for their own needs. Others, when watched harshly, cannot safely vary their pace at all. Every choice is shaped by experience. Who is supervising today? Which field is assigned? How tired you already are? Whether a child needs you back in the quarters, whether there is a fishing net to check before dark, whether your body has enough left to finish without collapsing. There is also a mental burden in waking each day not knowing whether the assigned task will be manageable. A person may rise sore from yesterday's labour and still have no choice but to meet another exacting demand. The body learns to calculate. How long for this ditch? How many strokes for that patch? How high the sun will be when the worst of it is done? The mind keeps its own silent ledger. A curious detail emerges from traveller accounts and plantation records. Some white observers praise the task system as if it proved the humanity or wisdom of low country slavery. It is an astonishing piece of self-flattery. You force people to labour under threat, then congratulate yourself because they are allowed to use whatever energy remains once your demands have been met. The mind truly can arrange a velvet cushion for almost any brutality if enough money is involved. The system also depends on expertise. Rice labour is not mere brute force. People know how water moves through banks and trunks. They know how to judge a weak embankment, how to cut weeds efficiently, how to prepare fields, how to process grain. Skilled workers may receive tasks suited to that knowledge, and their ability can make the plantation profitable in ways the owner barely understands. Yet skill does not bring security. In fact, it can bring heavier reliance and greater pressure. The more capable you are, the more the system leans on you. Women often carry a double load that plantation arithmetic prefers not to mention. They complete field or processing tasks, then return to cooking, childcare, washing, mending, and nursing the sick. The hours after the assigned task are not empty. They're crowded with unpaid necessities. A woman finishing her field quota may still have to pound corn, stir a pot, soothe a feverish child, patch a shirt, or fetch water before rest becomes possible. When people speak loosely of time left over under the task system, they often forget whose time that really is. Children learn the logic early. They watch adults measuring the day in burdens. They hear talk at dawn about what has been assigned. They sense the mood when a task is fair by plantation standards, and when it is cruelly inflated. Even play can bend around labour. A child may imitate hoeing with a stick. A child may be told to stay near the edge of a field until a mother finishes her portion. A child may grow up thinking of afternoon light not as beauty, but as evidence that enough work might soon be done. Because the task system leaves small pockets of relative autonomy, it also allows cultural and economic life to grow in those pockets. Gardens matter here. Fishing matters. Skilled crafts matter. Some enslaved people raise vegetables, trap animals, gather shellfish, or produce baskets and other items for local exchange when conditions allow. These activities do not create independence in any full sense, but they can improve meals, strengthen community ties, and provide modest leverage within a cruel economy. The plantation takes the largest share of labour, then leaves people to rescue fragments of life from the edges. You hear this in the sounds of late afternoon when tasks near completion, tools slow, voices lift a little. There is calculation in every glance at the sun. If the work is accepted as done, the body shifts from forced pace into personal urgency. Someone heads for a garden patch. Someone shoulders a fishing line. Someone hurries back to the cabin where a child has been coughing. Someone sits on a step and rubs cramped hands for a brief, priceless minute. These moments carry a quiet intensity. They belong to no law of freedom, only to the stubborn human habit of using whatever space oppression fails to crush completely. Yet the system can tighten without warning. A planter may enlarge tasks during busy seasons. An overseer may demand extra labour after completion. A driver may be ordered to inspect more harshly. Punishment can follow from perceived idleness, lateness, damaged tools, poor quality, or simple resentment from above. The person labouring never controls the final judgment. That uncertainty hangs over every assigned row and every cleared ditch. There are also differences between plantations. On some, supervision is tighter and tasks harsher. On others, local custom, absentee ownership, or the competence of enslaved drivers changes how the system feels from day to day. Historians still debate how much room for negotiation existed within different low-country settings, because records often reflect planter claims more than enslaved testimony. What seems certain is that no version of the task system removed the violence at slavery's core. It merely organised that violence with a particular local method. By evening, the meaning of a completed task settles into the muscles. Your shoulders throb, your calves twitch with fatigue. Mud dries on the skin and leaves a tight, itchy film. Hands smell of wet earth, wood, metal, or crushed plants. The body knows exactly what was demanded of it, and still there may be corn to grind, fish to clean, children to wash, clothing to mend. Rest arrives in thin layers. So when you look at a South Carolina rice plantation in 1800, the task system reveals more than a labour schedule. It reveals slavery's talent for disguising control as order. It turns whole days into measurable burdens, then lets people fight over the scraps of time that remain. It depends on black skill while pretending labour is merely assigned, not extracted. It creates tiny openings for family, food, craft, and prayer, then threatens those openings whenever authority feels challenged. The task is never just the ditch, the hoe, or the bank. The task is to survive a world where even your remaining hours must be won back one row at a time. You begin to notice something that plantation records try very hard to blur. The rice does not grow here by accident, and the methods that make it profitable do not spring fresh from the minds of white landowners in polished boots. The whole system depends on knowledge, careful, practical, experienced knowledge. Knowledge of water, timing, soil, seed, weather, tools, and plant behaviour. In the South Carolina low country of 1800, much of that knowledge lives in black hands. From a distance, a rice field can look simple. Flat ground, shining water, neat sections divided by banks. But the simplicity is deceptive. These fields are engineered landscapes that must be managed with precision. Water has to arrive at the right time and leave at the right time, as if it stands too long. The crop suffers. If drainage fails, the field turns from useful wetness into choking swamp. If the bank weakens, a whole section may flood badly. If planting happens at the wrong moment, labour is wasted and the season can slip away. Rice is patient only with those who understand it. You walk beside one of the banks and can see how much judgment the land demands. The embankment is packed earth, warm on the sunlit side and damp where the shade clings. Reeds stir at the edge. Water presses softly against the base. A skilled eye notices details that an outsider would miss. The place where the soil is too loose, the slight sag that hints at a weakness underneath, the colour of the water after rain, the way a trunk gate sits in its frame. These are not scholarly abstractions. They are daily readings of a living system. Many enslaved people on Carolina rice plantations are either African-born or descended from people carried from regions of West and Central Africa, where rice cultivation and wetland farming had long histories. Planters did not always understand the full depth of the expertise they were exploiting, but they recognized value. Over time, they relied on captive laborers who knew how to manage difficult agricultural environments. Historians broadly agree that African knowledge shaped the rice economy in fundamental ways, though scholars still argue over exactly how direct and consistent those links were from specific African regions to Carolina plantations. Some connections are clearly visible, others remain harder to trace with certainty because the records were built by traders and enslavers, not by the people whose skill they stole. Still, when you stand in the field itself, the practical truth is hard to miss. Rice requires more than strength. It requires a memory of methods. You see that memory in planting. Seed must be prepared and sown in ways suited to the field's condition. Spacing matters. Timing matters. The touch of the hand matters. In weeding, the worker must know what threatens the crop and what can be left alone. In harvesting, the maturity of the grain has to be judged carefully, because cutting too early or too late can ruin quality. In threshing and processing, rhythm becomes its own form of skill, with repeated movements trained into the muscles until the body itself seems to remember the proper pace. There is sound everywhere in this labour. The splash of a step into wet ground, the scrape of hose along earth, the rustle of stalks brushed by passing hands, the wooden knock of equipment, the rush of water moving through a gate when released. The sound can be almost musical in its repetition, though no one mistakes repetition for ease. A practiced worker listens as well as looks. An odd creak at a trunk gate may signal trouble. A change in water flow may mean a blockage. The field speaks in small noises. The smell of the work is distinct too. Freshly cut rice gives off a dry, grassy scent. Mud banks smell mineral and heavy. Standing water carries a green sweetness that can turn stale in the heat. Sweat mixes with damp cloth and sun-warmed wood. After processing begins, the air can fill with dust and husk. It settles on the skin, in the nose, on the tongue. The whole crop enters the body by smell and touch before it ever reaches a market barrel. One of the most revealing things about plantation life is how often enslaved expertise is treated as natural rather than learned. White observers may describe black workers as somehow suited to rice labour, as if talent was simply a racial trait that floated in the blood with no history attached. That language is convenient, of course. It turns stolen agricultural wisdom into something almost magical, which saves the planter from having to admit dependence. The truth is less flattering. Skill comes from tradition, adaptation, instruction, observation, and long, hard practice. It is accumulated human intelligence. The plantation wants the results while erasing the source. You can see how knowledge is passed between generations. An older worker corrects the angle of a younger person's tool. A woman shows a girl how to sort, handle, or prepare something without wasting effort. A man points out where a bank is soft and explains what the surface reveals about the hidden moisture below. These lessons may happen quietly, in fragments, folded into the work itself. There are no formal lectures here. The field is the classroom, and the price of inattention can be a damaged crop, punishment, or injury. Children absorb more than adults realize. They notice how elders read clouds. They hear which weeds are cursed by name. They learn where the ground is safest to cross after rain. They understand the order in which certain tasks must be done, even when they are not yet carrying full labour responsibilities. They live inside an environment dense with technical knowledge. Survival teaches observation early. A curious detail appears in descriptions of rice processing. In some places, the pounding and cleaning of rice required such trained rhythm that experienced workers could maintain a coordinated pace for long periods without direct instruction, almost as if the work had its own internal beat. That rhythm was not only efficient, it helped bodies endure monotony. Labour often becomes bearable through cadence, through breath matched to motion, through the body finding a pattern inside strain. Women's expertise is especially important in the processing side of the rice economy. Though plantation records often undervalue or generalise their labour, cleaning, pounding, sorting, and preparing grain for market required care, repetition, and fine judgment. These were not minor chores attached to fieldwork, they were central parts of the crop's movement from mud to profit. Yet because so much women's labour also included cooking, childcare, washing, and healing, their agricultural knowledge can disappear behind the false simplicity of the word domestic. There is nothing simple about making a plantation run. Touch becomes another form of reading. The hand knows when a stalk is ready. The fingers know the difference between useful firmness and dangerous weakness in wet earth. Feet know whether a path will hold. Shoulders know how much a bundle weighs before the mind forms the number. Even pain can be instructive. Blisters teach grip. Cramps teach pacing. Sunburn teaches the cost of unprotected hours. It is a hard education, but it is education all the same. The plantation owner may boast about improvement, canals, engineering, and profit margins. He may write letters full of pride about his successful crop. He may host guests who admire the orderly fields and the polished rice sent to market. Yet much of what he calls his achievement rests on knowledge he did not invent and labour he did not perform. This is one of the central truths of the rice coast. Wealth sits on top. Wisdom often works below. Some enslaved workers become so valued for their knowledge that they hold informal influence within the plantation world, though never secure power. A person known for judging water well, fixing a troubled gate, or organising an efficient harvest may be relied upon heavily. Others may seek their advice. Overseers may listen when practical decisions must be made quickly. But such reliance does not protect a person from sale, punishment, exhaustion, or family loss. Under slavery, usefulness can increase dependency without increasing safety. In fact, it can make the demands heavier. There is also creativity in adaptation. The Carolina Low Country is not identical to West Africa. Soil types differ, tides differ, climate patterns differ. So the knowledge carried across the Atlantic does not remain frozen. It changes. People test methods, blend traditions, and refine practice under local conditions. That process matters. It shows that enslaved communities were not only preserving memory, but actively innovating within brutal limits. Their intelligence was dynamic. Historians still debate how much planter management versus enslaved expertise drove specific technical advances in rice production. The answer is not always easy to pin down because elite records exaggerate elite control, but when you look at who handled the water, who read the field, who performed the processing, and who taught the next generation of workers, the practical balance becomes easier to sense. Plantation success relied on black agricultural knowledge at every stage that truly mattered. The irony is almost unbearable. A society built on claims of racial hierarchy depends daily on black mastery. The people denied legal personhood are often the ones most capable of making the land produce. The people called inferior are trusted with delicate systems of water control and crop handling that fortunes depend upon. The contradiction is not hidden if you stand close enough. It is there in every floodgate, every harvest, every barrel sent away. Even the atmosphere around the work carries a kind of authority. When an experienced field hand pauses and studies the water level, others notice. When someone says the bank will not hold, that warning carries weight. When a woman sorting grain rejects a batch as poorly prepared, she may be quietly defending standards that the market will later reward. This authority is practical, not legal. It grows from competence recognized by the community and sometimes grudgingly acknowledged by those in power. As afternoon light slides across the field, the crop itself begins to seem less like a plant and more like a record of human knowledge. Every line, every flooded section, every repaired bank reflects decisions made by people whose names rarely appear in proud histories. Their skill is built into the landscape, though the official story tries to hand credit upward. That official story is tidy, the truth is muddy, and perhaps that is fitting. Rice wealth in South Carolina rose from mud shaped by stolen expertise, not only from forced labour in the broad sense, but from trained judgment, inherited methods, and practical intelligence that crossed an ocean in human memory. The field is not just a site of suffering, it is also a site of knowledge under captivity, which makes the whole arrangement even more tragic. The plantation does not merely consume bodies, it consumes talent, insight, and generations of agricultural wisdom, then stamps another man's name on the result. So as you move through this world in 1800, you begin to see the crop differently. Rice is no longer a polished grain on a distant table. It is a chain of learned acts. It is water understood, soil interpreted, weather judged, rhythm maintained, and mistakes corrected in real time by people denied the right to claim what they know. The deadly power of the plantation lies not only in its ability to force labour, but in its ability to seize knowledge itself and turn it into wealth for someone else. When the workday loosens its grip and the light begins to soften, you turn toward the quarters. This is where the plantation changes character. The fields still hold heat. The ditches still breathe damp air. Mosquitoes still rise in whining clouds from the grass. Yet the evening draws people back toward the narrow spaces where their own lives, however constrained, take shape. The cabins are not comfortable in any generous sense. They are small, smoky, crowded, and often badly built. Still, they hold the most human part of the plantation. You walk along a packed dirt path worn by hundreds of feet. The ground is uneven, scattered with bits of straw, shell, ash, and scraps of wood. A few chickens scratch close to the doorways. A dog lifts its head, then settles again. Smoke from cooking fires hangs low in the humid air and catches in your throat with a bitter, familiar taste. The smell of supper drifts from cabin to cabin. Cornmeal, rice, salt fish, greens when they can be found, sometimes beans, sometimes a little pork, sometimes almost nothing that feels like enough. The cabins themselves are plain structures, often made of rough boards, clay chinking, or other local materials shaped by need rather than comfort. Some have stick and mud chimneys, some leak in heavy rain. Some lean slightly as if they are tired too. Doors open into one room in many cases, though layouts vary from place to place. Inside, the dimness arrives early, even before sunset. Shadows collect in the corners, smoke stains the rafters. The floor may be packed earth or rough planks. Furnishings are sparse, a few stools, a crude table, pegs for clothing. Bedding made from whatever cloth, straw, or stuffing can be gathered. Nothing here is accidental. Every item has to justify its presence by usefulness. The first thing you notice inside is the heat that lingers after the day. Walls hold it, roofs trap it, bodies add to it. If a cooking fire is going, the cabin feels close and dense, as if the air itself has grown thicker. Sweat gathers again on the neck even after the tools have been set down. Clothing clings, skin itches from salt, dust, and bites. A person may wash with precious water if it is available, splashing the face, arms, and feet in a basin or from a bucket. That brief coolness can feel almost luxurious. Evening work begins immediately. That is one of the quiet truths of plantation life. Finishing the assigned labour does not create rest so much as a shift in responsibility. A woman bends over a pot and stirs with tired arms. A man mends a net, patches a handle, or splits kindling. Someone shakes dirt from a blanket. Someone rubs salve onto swollen ankles. A child is told to fetch water, mind the fire, shell peas, or hush a younger sibling. Every motion says the same thing. Survival requires more labour than the field ledger ever counts. You hear many sounds in the quarters, layered so closely that one cabin's life spills into the next. Pots knock softly, firewood snaps, babies cry, then settle. Low voices rise and fall in conversation. Laughter comes suddenly now and then, dry and brief but real. Someone coughs from deep in the chest. Somewhere a tune is hummed under the breath while hands keep moving. The sounds are not polished. They are intimate. They belong to people reclaiming the evening with whatever energy remains. Food sits at the centre of this hour. Supper is not ceremonial, but it matters deeply. A pot of rice or cornmeal can be stretched, flavoured, and reshaped with intelligence born of scarcity. Fish caught in a nearby creek may improve the meal. Garden greens make a difference. Okra, peas, sweet potatoes, and small additions gathered or grown by enslaved families can transform a thin ration into something more sustaining. The smell of simmering food can steady the spirit even before the first bite. You feel how hunger sharpens attention. Children hover nearby. Adults taste cautiously, adjusting salt or heat if they can. No feast appears. But a warm bowl in tired hands means something enormous. Historians broadly agree that enslaved people in the Low Country often relied not just on planter rations, but on their own gardens, fishing, trapping, and skilled foodways to make life possible. Scholars still disagree over how far this extra provision reflected planter neglect, economic calculation, local custom, or the determined self-provisioning strategies of enslaved communities themselves. On the ground, the debate feels less abstract. People ate because they worked to make eating possible. Inside the cabins, touch tells its own story. The grain of rough wood against a palm, a patched shirt pulled over sore shoulders, damp cloth spread near the fire to dry, a child resting with a hot forehead against an adult arm, fingers combing through hair by firelight, hands rubbing lard or tallow into cracked skin. Evening is full of repair, and not only the repair of objects, bodies are being managed too. The quarters also carry a strong smell of fabric, smoke, oil, and damp bedding. It is not a pleasant perfume, but it is a lived smell, a human smell. One cabin may carry the earthy scent of sweet potatoes roasting near the hearth, another may smell of fish, iron pots, wet clothes, and a little medicinal bitterness from boiled herbs. Insects still find their way inside. Moths flutter near flame. Mosquitoes drift in through cracks and doorways. Someone slaps a forearm sharply and goes back to speaking. Conversation in the quarters does important work. It shares information. News of who is ill, who was punished, which overseer is in a foul mood, whether a boat was seen at the landing, whether someone heard of a sale on a neighbouring plantation, whether a woman in another cabin needs help with a baby. Talk can be practical, humorous, cautious, or deeply coded depending on who may be listening. Language itself becomes a tool of survival. A phrase that sounds ordinary may carry a warning. A joke may hide a complaint. A story may teach a lesson without naming it openly. Children animate the quarters in a way no plantation account book can capture. They chase each other between doorways. They are scolded for getting too close to the fire. They fall asleep suddenly in laps or on pallets, while the adults are still working. Their play may involve bits of string, sticks, shells, or nothing at all beyond imagination. In a world structured by domination, a child's game is a small refusal to become only a labouring body. It is brief. It is fragile. It matters anyway. Elders hold a different kind of evening authority. An older woman may oversee food preparation with calm efficiency, correcting younger hands. An older man may sit near the doorway and speak only when needed, though others listen closely when he does. Some are valued as healers, storytellers, prayer leaders, or keepers of memory. Age under slavery can bring weakness, but it can also bring standing within the community. A person who has endured many seasons becomes a living record of caution, custom, and hard-earned knowledge. A quirky detail from plantation descriptions occasionally appears in references to swept yards. Some enslaved families kept the ground around their cabins carefully cleared and swept, sometimes with handmade brooms, not merely for neatness but for order, pride, pest reduction, and the visual shaping of home space. There is something powerful in that image. Even where ownership is denied, people still mark a threshold and say, in effect, this small patch is where our life gathers. Evening also exposes the burden of illness. The quarters make suffering audible. In daylight, people may force the body through assigned work. At night, weakness can no longer be hidden so easily. A moan escapes, a cough worsens. A mother checks a child's skin for fever and tries not to show fear. Someone crushes herbs. Someone warms water. Someone offers a whispered prayer while smoke curls upward into the rafters. There is tenderness here, but tenderness has to work under pressure. Clothing receives attention too. Garments wear out fast under field conditions, and replacement is often inadequate. So mending is constant. You see needles flashing in low light, torn seams are closed, a shirt is turned and patched again, a head wrap is folded for the morning. The act is simple, the meaning is not. To mend clothing is to push back against the plantation's steady erosion of the body and everything around it. There can also be visiting between cabins when conditions allow. A person leans in a doorway and exchanges a few words. A bowl is carried from one household to another. A grandmother calls a child over. A couple steals a few moments of nearness while others look the other way. Social life is not separate from hardship. It grows inside hardship, using little openings of time and trust. That is why the quarters matter so much. They are where enslaved people create relationships that the plantation cannot fully measure. You begin to sense that home under slavery is never simple. A cabin can be a place of care, laughter, song, memory, and family habit. It can also be a place of grief, overcrowding, worry, and exhaustion. A person may love the life built inside a cabin while hating the system that assigns that cabin, and can take loved ones away from it at any moment. The emotional texture is layered. Comfort exists, but it is always vulnerable. Night deepens slowly in the low country. Outside, frogs begin their steady chorus. Crickets scrape in the grass. The air may cool only a little, enough to notice on damp skin. Inside, the fire burns lower. Shadows flicker on walls patched with age and smoke. A child has finally gone still. Someone keeps speaking in a soft voice from the darkness, telling a story, perhaps, or simply refusing silence for a little longer. The day has not become easy. It has merely become quieter. Historians still argue over how much privacy, autonomy, and domestic stability different plantation quarters allowed, because arrangements varied by region, owner, and size of the enslaved community. But one thing is clear when you step into these cabins in imagination. The quarters were not empty resting stations between labour demands. They were living spaces filled with work, intimacy, improvisation, and emotional complexity. This is where food was stretched, children were raised, the sick were tended, and fragments of dignity were defended with astonishing persistence. By the final hours of the night, bedding is shaken out. Bodies lower themselves onto pallets or rough frames. The smell of ash lingers. The skin still carries traces of mud, smoke, and sweat. Muscles throb in the calves and lower back. Through cracks in the wall, a thread of moonlight may slip across the floor. Sleep comes unevenly. Some people surrender to it at once from exhaustion. Others lie awake listening to coughing, insects, distant water, and the restless thoughts that visit when the cabin has gone still. This is what the quarters hold in South Carolina in 1800. Not peace exactly, not safety, but the closest thing many people on the plantation can claim as their own. A narrow room, a cooking fire, a child breathing nearby, a shirt being patched for another day, a whispered joke, a bowl shared between tired hands. The cabins are poor, but they are full of life, and that life, pressed into smoke-darkened walls and humid night air, reveals a truth the grand plantation house would rather ignore. The deepest human world on the plantation lives not in the spaces of display, but in the quarters after sundown. You feel the plantation's cruelty most sharply when you notice how little separates survival from hunger. The difference can be a garden row that lives through bad weather, a fish caught at dusk, a handful of peas saved for the pot, or a ration that lasts 3 days instead of 2. On paper, owners can claim they provide enough. Paper is very generous that way. The body is less easily fooled. The body knows when meals are thin, when work burns more strength than food replaces, and when clothing hangs too loose because there is simply not enough to fill the ribs. Rations form the official base of daily eating on many rice plantations. These usually include cornmeal or corn, sometimes rice, and often salted meat or fish in limited quantity. Molasses may appear now and then, so may peas or beans. The amounts vary by plantation and by the moods and habits of those in charge. The food is not designed for pleasure. It is designed to keep labour going at the cheapest possible cost. That is the principle underneath everything. Not nourishment in the full sense, maintenance. You stand near a cooking area in the evening and smell what that principle becomes in practice. Cornmeal thickening in a pot. Saltfish giving off its sharp, briny scent as it cooks. Greens softening with onion if any can be found. Smoke from pine wood drifting across everything. The smell is comforting only because people have learned to make comfort from it. The ingredients themselves are humble, repetitive, and often insufficient, yet skilled hands know how to stretch them, season them, combine them, and make them sustaining enough to carry another day. Rice, oddly enough, is part of this story in more than one way. The crop that creates vast wealth for planters is also eaten by the people forced to cultivate it. Though not in the luxurious form that appears on elite tables, broken grains, common preparations, and practical dishes matter here. Rice can be filling. It can be mixed with fish, greens, beans, or whatever else is available. It absorbs flavour well. It can be cooked soft for the sick. In a place built around rice, the grain moves through every level of society, but never equally. Garden plots often become the difference between mere rationing and actual survival. In the small amount of time wrestled away from plantation demands, enslaved families may grow sweet potatoes, collards, peas, beans, squash, okra, pumpkins, and other useful crops depending on season and soil. A small patch of cultivated ground near the quarters can feel almost miraculous. You see careful rows, mounded earth, vines curling, leaves shining after rain. The smell of loosened soil in a garden is different from the smell of the fields. It carries purpose without the same bitterness. This is food grown for one's own pot, one's own children, one's own people. That changes its meaning entirely. Fishing also matters deeply in the low country. Creeks, rivers, and tidal inlets offer fish, crabs, shrimp, and shellfish to those with the knowledge and chance to gather them. A line cast at the right hour can improve a meal more than any planter ration ever intended. Nets are repaired carefully. Traps are placed where water and habit make them useful. The taste of fresh caught fish, cooked that same evening, can turn a day of weariness into something briefly bearable. It is not abundance. It is relief. Historians broadly agree that self-provisioning through gardens, fishing, and gathering played a major role in the lives of enslaved people in the Carolina Low Country. Scholars still debate how much this reflected customary allowance, planter neglect, economic convenience, or the active resistance of enslaved communities who refused to depend entirely on meagre rations. In lived experience, the answer is not one thing. It is all tangled together. Planters save money. Enslaved people work fiercely to feed themselves better than the plantation chooses to feed them. Hunger sits in the middle of that arrangement, waiting for any mistake. Children learn hunger early. They learn the feeling of waiting while food cooks. They learn to eat what is available without complaint, because complaint changes nothing. They learn which berries are safe, which fruit can be stolen or gathered quietly, and how to be patient when adults scrape together a meal from almost nothing. A child may remember the smell of roasting sweet potatoes with more tenderness than a wealthy person remembers a banquet. Because warmth and fullness are not small things when they cannot be trusted to return tomorrow. The touch of food matters too. A rough wooden spoon in the hand, a warm bowl pressed into tired palms, fish bones carefully picked by firelight, cornbread crumbling slightly as it is broken and shared. The body responds before the mind forms words for it. Heat travels from the bowl into the fingers, steam rises toward the face, saliva wakes at the first smell, hunger sharpens the senses, then quiets for a little while once eating begins. Clothing tells a parallel story of insufficiency. Enslaved people are typically issued garments meant for utility and economy, not comfort, coarse shirts, simple dresses or shifts, trousers, jackets in colder weather if the owner is marginally responsible, head coverings, blankets, sometimes shoes, though quality and consistency vary sharply. Fabric is often rough against the skin, seams split under heavy labour, cloth thins at the knees, elbows, and seat. Shoes can rub raw spots, then fall apart long before replacements arrive. Bare feet become common not because conditions are gentle, but because the ground and the work destroy footwear quickly. You can feel these garments as you imagine wearing them through a low-country season. In summer, coarse cloth scratches damp skin and traps heat. In winter, thin layers do little against wet cold that creeps into the bones. A soaked hem slaps against the ankle. A torn sleeve exposes skin to sun and insects. A head wrap carries salt from dried sweat. Nothing fits like ease. Everything fits like necessity. Women often alter clothing repeatedly to make it last. A dress is patched at the shoulder, then again at the hem, then turned into smaller garments for a child once the original form is too far gone. Men mend shirts, repair trousers, and save scraps for ties, wraps, or patches. Needles are precious. Thread is not wasted. You hear the soft pull of fibre through cloth in the evening, the tiny rhythm of repair done by firelight after a full day's labour. A patched garment is not just a sign of poverty, it is evidence of care and persistence. A quirky detail survives in some descriptions of plantation life. Enslaved people sometimes valued certain hats, kerchiefs, beads, or bits of brighter cloth far beyond their apparent worth, because a small ornament could transform plain issued clothing into something personal. That detail says a great deal. Even in a system designed to standardize and diminish, people still search for beauty, style, and self-expression. A coloured head wrap tied well can carry pride. A polished button can feel like dignity. The body, of course, remains at the centre of all this. Poor nutrition and hard labour combine in visible ways. Muscles may be strong from constant work, yet the body can still be underfed. Bellies are filled, but not always well nourished. Energy rises and falls unevenly. Skin may show signs of deficiency. Teeth suffer. Illness hits harder when strength is already low. Pregnancy, nursing, childhood growth, old age, and fever all make nutritional shortfall more dangerous. The plantation system counts calories for output, not for flourishing. Smell and texture govern clothing almost as much as sight does. A shirt worn through field labour carries sweat, mud, wood smoke, and sometimes the faint sourness of drying marsh water. Blankets smell of ash and body heat. Stored cloth picks up damp from the air. Washing helps, but washing itself requires labour, soap, water, and time, all of which are limited. A cleaned garment drying in the evening breeze can feel like a small victory. The scent of cloth freshly washed, even imperfectly, stands out in a world where so much remains stained by work. There is also status within scarcity. Skilled workers may sometimes acquire slightly better garments, extra cloth, or small personal items through favour, market exchange, or side earnings. House servants may have clothing of different cut or quality depending on the owner's preference for display. But these differences do not change the larger truth. Most clothing on the plantation is chosen by those in power, distributed sparingly, and worn until it nearly dissolves. Food, too, can mark differences within the enslaved community. Someone with access to a good fishing place, a thriving garden, or a relative skilled at trapping may eat better than someone without those advantages. Older women known for cooking skill can make the same ration taste richer and more satisfying than a poorer hand could manage alone. A household with several working adults may stretch resources better than one carrying sickness or too many small children. The plantation produces inequality even within oppression, and people navigate that carefully, often sharing when they can and guarding what they must. Historians still argue over the exact caloric adequacy of many ration systems, because plantation records say one thing, archaeological evidence suggests another, and lived reality likely shifted with season, theft, barter, weather, and individual owner behaviour. But the emotional truth is easier to grasp than the mathematics. Food and clothing were never secure enough to be ignored. They required thought every day. What is left in the barrel? What can be dried for later? Which shirt can still survive another patch? Whether the child's feet can manage without shoes this month? These are intimate calculations, repeated until they feel as natural as breathing. You begin to notice how skill turns deprivation into survival. Someone salts fish carefully for later use. Someone saves seed from the strongest garden plants. Someone turns scraps into a quilted layer. Someone seasons a plain pot so well that everyone eats a little more gladly. Someone hides away a better cloth for Sunday, prayer, courtship, or burial. These choices are practical, but they are also emotional. They refuse the plantation's suggestion that bare existence should be enough. By night, when a meal has been eaten and garments are laid out for mourning, the body offers its own verdict. Stomach less sharp now, feet still sore, shoulders still aching beneath rough cloth, skin itchy where seams have rubbed, hands smelling faintly of food smoke and thread. You lie down knowing that what you ate and what you wore were both part of a larger struggle to remain whole, in a place designed to wear people away. That is what food and clothing mean on a South Carolina rice plantation in 1800. They are not background details. They are the daily frontier between endurance and collapse. They show how the plantation tried to provide the minimum while extracting the maximum. They show how enslaved people used gardens, fishing, mending, seasoning, saving, and sheer practical intelligence to create a life more livable than the system intended. In every patched sleeve and every carefully stretched meal, you can see the same quiet determination. If survival will not be given, it will be assembled by hand. You discover that the plantation reaches deepest into human life when it tries to control love. Work can exhaust the body, hunger can narrow the mind, fever can shake the bones. But the threat that unsettles people most completely is often the threat of separation. On a South Carolina rice plantation in 1800, family exists everywhere, and security exists almost nowhere. Parents raise children they do not legally own. Husbands and wives build homes that can be broken by a signature. Brothers, sisters, grandparents, cousins, and chosen kin form networks of care under a system always ready to tear those networks apart. The cabins at night reveal this most clearly. You see a mother settling 2 children on a pallet, using one arm to pull them close while her other hand still works at some small repair. You see a father carving or mending by low firelight while listening for a baby's breathing. You hear an older girl hush a younger one with quiet firmness that sounds half like play and half like duty. Family life does not unfold in privacy or ease. It unfolds in cramped rooms, under fatigue, under watchfulness, under the knowledge that any bond may be tested by sale, punishment, debt, or whim. Marriage under slavery is a complicated and painful thing. Some couples are recognized informally within the enslaved community and by custom on the plantation, even if the law does not honor their union in the way it honors white marriages. Some jump the broom or mark commitment through spoken vows, prayer, and witness. Some live together in the same cabin if plantation arrangements allow. Others belong to different plantations and see one another only when movement is permitted, often on evenings, Sundays, or special moments carved from labor time. Love persists, but the system never treats it as sacred. You can feel the emotional strain of this arrangement in the ordinary details. A woman waits at a doorway longer than usual because her husband has not appeared from the neighbouring plantation. A man saves a little food or cloth because he hopes to carry it to a wife living miles away. A child asks when a father is coming. An older woman answers carefully, because truth and comfort are not always the same thing. Every relationship is braided with uncertainty. Children live at the centre of this fragile world. They are loved intensely, and that love is sharpened by danger. Parents teach them how to behave in the presence of overseers, how to move carefully near water, how to carry small tasks without drawing anger, and how to read mood from tone of voice long before they are old enough to understand the politics of slavery. Mothers may carry infants close while working in or near the quarters. Older children often care for younger ones, forming chains of responsibility within the family that begin far too soon. The sound of family life on the plantation is full of intimate signals. A certain whistle calls children home. A grandmother's warning tone stops a quarrel before it grows. A baby's cry brings several women to attention at once. Quiet laughter rises when someone tells a familiar story. A child whimpers from a bad dream and is soothed before fully waking. None of this appears in plantation ledgers. Yet these sounds are the real music of domestic life under bondage. Parents must teach caution without crushing spirit. That is delicate work. A child needs warmth, play, and a sense of belonging. A child also needs to survive an environment built on unequal power. So instruction comes early. Do not wander there. Do not answer back that way. Do not step too close to the bank. Keep your voice down near the big house. Watch your little brother. Listen when your name is called. The lesson is never only obedience. It is protection. Historians broadly agree that enslaved families in the Low Country formed resilient kinship structures despite relentless legal vulnerability. Scholars still debate how much demographic stability existed on particular plantations, especially in relation to sale patterns, mortality, and the balance between locally born and newly imported populations in earlier decades. But the emotional truth is plain enough. Family was both the greatest source of strength and the point at which slavery could wound most efficiently. Grandparents and elders often play a crucial role in communities shaped by hard labour and irregular supervision. Older people may hold together the memory of who belongs to whom, who was born where, who married whom, and which child resembles which absent parent. That knowledge matters. It gives identity depth. It tells a child that they are not just a worker in the making, but part of a lineage. An elder saying, "You have your mother's eyes," or your grandfather's way of laughing is doing more than making conversation. They are protecting continuity. A curious detail emerges from some accounts of enslaved family life. Naming could carry deep intention. Children might receive names linked to relatives, places, biblical figures, or significant events, creating layers of meaning that white owners rarely understood. A name could be memory folded into daily speech. It could honour the dead, bind the living, or quietly preserve cultural echoes that the plantation never meant to keep alive. Yet the threat of sale hangs over everything. A planter in debt may sell a man away from his wife. An estate division after death may scatter siblings. A child may be valued not as a child, but as future labour. That knowledge changes the texture of affection. It can make tenderness more urgent, not less. A mother braids a daughter's hair with unusual care because tomorrow is never guaranteed. A father teaches a son how to mend a net, not because it is the perfect evening for lessons, but because he may not always be there to teach. Ordinary acts become urgent when time together feels uncertain. The fear of separation does not always arrive with warning. Sometimes rumour runs through the quarters before any official word is spoken. Voices drop, faces change, people begin asking cautious questions. Has the owner been writing letters? Has a trader been seen nearby? Is there talk of settling debts? The atmosphere thickens. Even children sense it. The air in the cabin feels different, though no one may explain why. Anxiety has a smell almost like storm weather, metallic and hard to ignore. Mothers carry special burdens under slavery because both their labour and their children are subject to the plantation's demands. They must work, nurse, comfort, discipline, and protect, often while physically exhausted. The sight of a woman cooking with one child on her hip and another tugging at her dress while she still thinks about tomorrow's task is common and heartbreaking. Her care is not sentimental ornament. It is labour inside labour. Fathers, too, navigate a narrow and painful space. They may work long hours under external authority while trying to maintain moral authority within their families. They may teach skills, correct behaviour, provide food from fishing or hunting, and offer emotional steadiness, all while knowing they cannot shield loved ones from the fundamental power of ownership. A father may feel pride in his children and helplessness in the same breath. Those two feelings live together often on the plantation. Chosen kin are just as important as blood relatives. An aunt may not be a biological aunt. A grandmother may be related through affection, not birth. Older children may be treated as siblings because they sleep, work, and grow together. This expansion of family is not casual. It is strategic, loving, and necessary. When a system threatens every legal bond, community builds stronger informal ones. A child with many protective adults has a better chance of being held emotionally together when life turns cruel. Touch becomes especially meaningful in such a world. A hand on a child's back while passing through a doorway. Fingers braiding hair slowly in the evening. A couple sitting close enough for knees to touch after a long day. A grandmother rubbing grease into a boy's cracked heels. These gestures are small, but they push back against the plantation's effort to make the body only an instrument of labour. Here the body is also comfort, reassurance, belonging. Storytelling helps family endure. At night, adults tell children tales that entertain, warn, and teach. Some come from African traditions reshaped in the Americas. Some are biblical. Some are drawn from plantation life with names and details altered. Trickster tales are especially powerful because they offer wit against strength, cunning against authority, survival through intelligence. A child laughs at the clever animal or sly figure. An adult hears something sharper underneath. Illness tests family ties in painful ways. When fever enters a cabin, everyone's routine changes. Someone fetches water, someone cools the skin, someone tends the younger children while a mother stays with the sick one. If the patient worsens, the cabin fills with tension that no words can soften. Should work continue in the morning? Who can stay behind? Will the overseer permit it? Love must negotiate constantly with coercion. There is also joy, though it never arrives untouched by risk. A baby's first steps can draw a room into delighted laughter. Courtship can bring teasing from neighbours and bright attention to clothing or posture. A child's quick answer can make adults smile even on a hard evening. Family life is not a mere shelter from pain. It is an active source of delight, pride, irritation, memory, and shared identity. That complexity is important. Enslaved families were not only suffering units, they were full human worlds. Historians still argue over the degree to which low-country plantation organisation, including the task system and absentee ownership patterns, may have created slightly more room for family-based domestic life than in some other slave regimes. Such arguments must be handled carefully. More room does not mean secure life. It does not mean protection from sale. It does not mean recognized marriage or safe childhood. It means only that within a violent system, people sometimes found narrow spaces to build homes of feeling and obligation. By late night, those homes grow quiet. Breathing slows. The fire lowers to glow and ash. Outside, insects continue their endless chorus. Inside, children sleep with limbs flung across patched blankets. Adults lie awake a little longer, perhaps listening, perhaps worrying, perhaps praying. In the darkness, family feels both solid and terribly vulnerable. Solid because love has been practiced all day in 100 ordinary ways. Vulnerable because another person still claims the right to break it. This is what life was actually like for black families on rice plantations in South Carolina around 1800. Home existed, but under threat. Marriage existed, but without legal shelter. Parenting existed, but under conditions of forced labour and constant uncertainty. Kinship widened creatively because the official world offered so little protection. What survives in this world is not family in a soft, idealized sense. It is family as deliberate work, emotional courage, and daily reconstruction. A meal shared, a child taught, a lover awaited, a name remembered, a hand held in the dark. These acts could not end slavery, but they gave people reasons to endure it another day. When darkness settles fully over the plantation, another life begins to show itself. The fields go quiet except for frogs, insects, and the faint movement of water against the banks. The big house dims at a distance, its lamp small and self-satisfied. But near the quarters, the night thickens with voices, songs, prayers, stories, and silences that carry meaning of their own. This is the spiritual life of the plantation. Though spiritual does not mean separate from hardship, it grows directly out of hardship. It answers fear, grief, longing, and memory with sound, rhythm, image, and belief. You notice first how the night changes the ear. Daytime is ruled by commands, tools, and work sounds. Night allows softer tones to matter. A woman's voice lifted in prayer, a low hum from a cabin doorway, the gentle tap of fingers on a table in time with a tune, a child listening so closely that even breathing seems quieter. Sound becomes shelter. It gathers people without building walls. Religion in the Low Country around 1800 is layered and complex. Some enslaved people have been exposed to Christian teaching through white churches, plantation instruction, travelling ministers, or the influence of African American preachers. Others hold older beliefs, practices, and cosmologies carried through family memory, reshaped by time and by the Atlantic crossing. Most do not live inside one neat system. Instead, belief becomes a woven thing. Biblical stories meet ancestral respect. Prayer sits beside signs, dreams, herbal knowing, and protective customs. Spiritual life is not tidy because life itself is not tidy. You sit near a cabin and hear someone begin a prayer. The words are simple, steady, and direct. Thanks for food, pleas for the sick, protection for children, mercy for those in danger, strength for the weary. The voice may tremble slightly from fatigue, but not from uncertainty. Around that voice, others murmur agreement. Someone says yes. Someone whispers, "Lord, hear." Someone wipes a face and looks toward the floor. The prayer does not remove pain. It gives pain a language. Christianity can offer enslaved people a powerful framework for hope and dignity, especially in stories of deliverance, suffering, judgment, and divine justice. The tale of Israel in bondage, the cry of the oppressed, the promise that the mighty will be brought low. These themes strike deep. Yet Christianity on the plantation is never neutral. White planters may encourage selected teachings that stress obedience, humility, and heavenly reward while ignoring the sharper edges of liberation. Enslaved hearers are not passive. They listen with their own needs, their own intelligence, and their own experience. A sermon meant to teach submission may still plant dangerous thoughts about Pharaoh. Historians broadly agree that enslaved religion in the American South was creative, adaptive, and deeply communal rather than merely borrowed from white forms. Scholars still debate how much specific African cosmologies remained intact in various local settings and how much they blended into new Afro-Atlantic religious expression. In the Carolina Low Country, where African cultural retention remained especially strong, the spiritual world likely carried many echoes that white observers only dimly understood. The records often miss this because outsiders noticed words more easily than they noticed meaning. You hear songs too, not polished performance songs, work-worn songs, prayer songs, lullabies, call and response phrases passed gently between voices. Some are quiet enough to avoid notice, some rise fuller when there is relative safety in numbers. Melody bends under emotion. Rhythm lives in the body even when there are no instruments. A foot taps softly on packed earth. Hands clap once, then again. Careful not to draw too much attention. The music is never only entertainment. It is memory made audible. A song can hold several things at once. It can soothe a child, comfort the grieving, teach a line of scripture, and let sorrow breathe without naming it directly. It can also hide meaning in plain sight, words about crossing water, going home, watching, waiting. Or deliverance may carry more than one layer. The plantation hears a hymn. The singers hear a whole interior world moving beneath it. Storytelling shares that same layered power. In the evening, adults tell stories that amuse, warn, and preserve identity. Trickster tales remain especially alive because they honour cleverness in a world built by force. The weak survive by wit. The proud are embarrassed. The greedy are outmanoeuvred. Children laugh at the animal who escapes trouble again. Adults appreciate the deeper lesson without needing it explained aloud. Story makes intelligence feel noble when power says it is nothing. Some tales carry traces of African memory in their structure, characters, or moral shape. Others are adapted through local experience until they belong fully to the Low Country, a swamp spirit, a dangerous crossing, a figure who listens poorly and pays the price, a grandmother who knows which signs not to ignore. These patterns move through the night from mouth to ear, and then into memory. A child raised on such stories learns more than amusement. The child learns how the world may behave, and how one might behave within it. Dreams also matter. You notice how carefully some people speak about them. A troubling dream may be mentioned in the morning with concern. A dream of a dead relative may be treated as a visitation, warning, or comfort. Certain signs in nature can be read spiritually too. The call of a bird, the behaviour of an animal, a sudden change in weather, an unusual coincidence. These may suggest that the visible world is not the whole world. In a life where official knowledge is often used against you, alternative systems of meaning carry special force. A curious detail appears in descriptions of African American folk practice in the broader region. Protective objects, roots, small bundles, marked items, or carefully placed materials could sometimes be used to ward off harm, attract luck, or signal spiritual caution. White observers often dismiss such things as superstition because dismissal is easier than understanding. But within the community, these acts could express a serious belief that the world is charged with forces not visible at a glance. Protection was practical, emotional, and spiritual all at once. The body participates fully in belief. You see it in bowed heads, lifted hands, rocking movement, and the physical release that comes with prayer spoken aloud after a day of restraint. A person who is held in grief all afternoon may begin to cry softly during a hymn. Another may breathe more deeply as the group's voices gather around them. A mother rubbing a child's back while humming a spiritual line is doing theology with her hands. A grandfather tapping the beat with his heel while speaking of judgment and mercy is teaching through rhythm as much as language. Children absorb this world naturally, though they fall asleep to prayer. They learn refrains before they can explain them. They hear Bible names, ancestral sayings, and cautionary tales woven into ordinary speech. They watch adults become solemn during certain songs and lively during certain stories. They learn that some words are spoken loudly, some quietly, and some only in trusted company. Spiritual education on the plantation is rarely formal. It is lived, heard, and felt. Communal gatherings, when possible, can deepen these bonds. A few cabins sharing a prayer meeting, a Sunday gathering led by a trusted elder or preacher, a baptism whispered about with excitement, a funeral marked with song and tears. These events are dangerous in one sense because gatherings can attract suspicion. They are necessary in another because no one survives grief or fear alone for long. Community gives belief weight. A single prayer is comfort. Many voices together become strength. Death presses hard on spiritual life because death is never far away. Children die, mothers die, men in the fields die, fever takes some, injury takes others, age, childbirth, and exhaustion claim more. The plantation may register these deaths in cold practical terms, but within the quarters, death changes the air. Morning songs rise lower and slower. Stories are told about the dead. A name is spoken carefully. A child asks where someone has gone. Belief steps in where explanation fails. Heaven, rest, reunion, ancestors, God's keeping. These ideas help the living endure what they cannot repair. Funerary customs can carry a blend of Christian and older African-influenced elements. The washing or dressing of a body, the speaking of prayers, the use of song, the attention paid to burial place, all may reflect layered traditions. Historians still argue over the exact continuity of specific burial practices in different communities, because evidence is fragmentary and often filtered through hostile observers. But there is little doubt that the enslaved treated burial with meaning far deeper than the planter class usually recognized. To care for the dead is to insist that a person was more than property. Joy belongs to spiritual life too. That matters. Belief is not only a response to suffering, it is also celebration, wit, rhythm, and release. A well-loved story can fill a cabin with smiles. A powerful prayer can leave people feeling steadier. A song can send a child to sleep in peace. On some nights, laughter and devotion stand very close together. The line between sacred and ordinary is thin because both are lived in the same body, under the same roof, with the same people. Language itself becomes sacred through repetition. Certain phrases gather power because they have been spoken so often in need. Lord willing, God keep you. Wait on the morning, trouble do not last, mercy come. These expressions are small, but they carry weathered faith. They pass from one mouth to another like shared tools. In a dangerous world, familiar sacred language can feel as necessary as food. You begin to understand that spiritual life on the plantation is not escape from reality. It is another way of naming reality. It says that suffering has witnesses, that justice may exist beyond the planter's law, that the dead are not erased by a ledger, that memory can survive displacement, that children can inherit more than fear, that song can turn grief into something bearable enough to carry together. By the deepest part of night, the cabin's quiet again. A few embers glow red. The insects outside continue their endless, needle-thin music. Somewhere a final prayer is spoken over sleeping children. Somewhere a woman hums until the last restless baby goes still. Somewhere an old man stares into the dark and thinks thoughts too large for speech. The plantation sleeps uneasily, but the spiritual life within it remains awake in subtler ways, held in dreams, fragments of melody, remembered stories, and the calm repetition of faith. This is what belief looked and sounded like for Black Americans on rice plantations in South Carolina around 1800. Not simple church doctrine handed down from above, but a rich inner world formed from scripture, memory, rhythm, grief, humour, and longing. A world where prayer and folklore stood side by side, where music carried truth more gently than plain speech could, where stories trained the mind to survive, where the sacred was not sealed off from the mud and smoke of daily life, but walked directly through them, lighting the darkness just enough to endure another night. You see the true shape of plantation power when someone refuses it, even in the smallest way. A rice plantation in South Carolina around 1800 is not held together by agriculture alone. It is held together by threat of punishment, threat of sale, threat of humiliation, threat of pain delivered publicly enough that others will absorb the lesson. The smooth language of order and discipline, so loved by slaveholders, rests on a simple fact. People do not submit willingly to bondage. Force must stand behind every command. Punishment begins long before a whip is lifted. It begins in posture, in surveillance, in the way an overseer rides into view and conversation changes at once. It begins in the silence that falls when authority approaches. It begins in the daily knowledge that any perceived slowness, disobedience, insolence, theft, wandering, or poor work can bring retaliation. The body lives under anticipation. Muscles tighten before blows ever land. A person learns to read mood quickly because the wrong answer, wrong glance, or wrong delay can change the day. On the rice plantation, punishment can take many forms. Whipping is the most infamous and the most feared, but it is not the only one. Food may be withheld. Extra work may be assigned. A person may be confined, threatened with sale, struck with a fist or stick, or publicly shamed in ways meant to reduce dignity as much as cause pain. Women, men, and sometimes children all live within reach of this violence, though the exact forms may differ according to age, gender, and the temper of those in charge. The system does not need to punish everyone equally. It only needs enough examples to keep fear circulating. You hear punishment before you see it sometimes. The sharp tone of an argument near a field edge, the sudden crack of a whip carried through humid air, the low murmur that moves across a work group when someone is being singled out. Then comes the quieter aftermath. A person breathing hard, someone refusing to cry out, another worker staring at the ground because looking too directly could be dangerous. Sound matters because terror travels by ear. One punishment can reach many bodies at once. The emotional humiliation is deliberate. Violence on plantations is often staged as instruction. A person may be punished in front of others so the event becomes a lesson, written on one body for the sake of many. That public quality deepens the wound. Pain is bad enough. Pain used as a message is worse. It tells the victim they are not only suffering, but being made into an example. It tells everyone else that their own flesh remains available for the same purpose. Historians broadly agree that physical punishment remains central to the maintenance of slavery, even in regions like the Low Country, where the task system allowed some limited workday flexibility. Scholars still debate how often punishment was directly administered by planters, overseers, drivers, or other enslaved intermediaries on specific plantations, because records are incomplete and often self-serving. What is not in doubt is the structure itself. The plantation depends on violence, whether it is visible every hour or held in reserve like a knife on the table. And still, resistance appears everywhere, not always in open revolt, though revolt is part of the wider history of slavery and lives in planter nightmares. More often, resistance works in smaller, quieter, more intimate ways. A tool is used slowly. A task is misunderstood with suspicious convenience. A netted fish fails to reach the owner's kitchen. A child is taught something the system would prefer erased. A warning is passed quietly from one cabin to another. A person preserves energy rather than spending it lavishly for someone else's profit. These acts may seem minor from a distance. Up close, they are moral decisions about how much of the self can be withheld from ownership. You begin to understand why planters are often obsessed with what they call idleness, insolence, or petty theft. These complaints reveal their dependence. They fear not only rebellion, but the daily leaking away of total control. An enslaved person who pretends not to understand a command, who breaks a tool in a way that might be accidental, who keeps back a portion of food, who uses evening hours for community rather than planter advantage, is refusing the system in small but real ways. The plantation senses this refusal constantly. That is why it is so touchy, so punitive, so unable to relax. A curious detail from the era is how often planters complained in letters and journals that enslaved people were cunning. The complaint is telling. Cunning means intelligence used outside the master's plan. It means the enslaved are not passive material. It means they notice loopholes, exploit confusion, measure character, and act strategically. Of course, slaveholders disliked cunning. Any mind active enough to protect itself becomes offensive to those who demand obedience. Women often resist in ways the official record blurs or ignores. They may protect children from attention, hide food, manipulate domestic expectations, exchange information across households, slow certain forms of labour, or use illness claims strategically when bodies are genuinely overburdened. They can also resist through speech, sarcasm, silence, sexual refusal where possible, and the maintenance of kin networks that outlast the plantation's attempts to atomize people. Much of this resistance does not look dramatic because it cannot afford to. It still matters deeply. Men may resist through work slowdowns, covert hunting or trading, sabotage of equipment, physical self-assertion in charged moments, or attempts to flee temporarily or permanently. Yet gender lines are never neat. Anyone may conceal food, anyone may pass news, anyone may refuse inwardly even while appearing outwardly compliant. Resistance is not a costume worn by one type of person. It is a habit of mind adapting to circumstance. Flight remains one of the boldest forms of defiance, though especially difficult in the low country. Swamps, rivers, patrols, dogs, distance, and unfamiliar terrain all make escape dangerous. At the same time, the watery landscape can offer cover to those who know it well. A person may disappear briefly into marsh and woodland, hoping to evade pursuit or visit loved ones without permission. Some flee for a few days, some aim for longer freedom, some are caught and punished harshly. Every escape attempt exposes the plantation's weakness. If slavery were natural, chains would not need chasing. Touch and pain are part of this story too. Punishment leaves marks that alter how a person sleeps, bends, or dresses. Scar tissue tightens the skin, bruises bloom and fade, wrists remember restraint, a body learns to protect tender areas instinctively. Yet the same body can become a site of defiance. A person may stand upright during punishment. A person may refuse to beg. A person may continue to walk with dignity afterward, though every step hurts. Slaveholders understand this and sometimes fear it more than shouting. Endurance can itself be a kind of rebellion, when the system intends to break the spirit along with the flesh. Resistance also lives in language, in jokes made just out of hearing, in names given privately, in stories that mock the proud, in songs that sound obedient to one listener and quietly dangerous to another, in coded warnings, in the simple decision to keep speaking to one another as full persons while the law insists otherwise. Speech can preserve an inner world that power cannot fully enter. Children absorb the grammar of resistance early. They learn whom to trust, when to keep silent, how to carry a message without seeming to carry one, how to avoid giving away too much emotion in front of the wrong adult. They may witness punishment and feel terror. They may also witness courage in the aftermath, when someone is fed, washed, hidden, comforted, or defended by the community. A child learns that the plantation is powerful. The child also learns that power is not the same as respect. Communal solidarity becomes one of the strongest barriers against total domination. After a punishment, someone tends the wounds, someone brings food, Someone speaks quietly to restore a battered sense of self. Someone keeps children away from the worst sight. Someone memorizes what happened. These acts are not sentimental extras. They are the social repair work that prevents terror from becoming complete victory. Historians still argue over how to define resistance under slavery, especially in relation to everyday acts that may blur with survival strategies. Was slowing work always conscious protest, or sometimes exhaustion? Was tool-breaking sabotage, or simple wear? The answer can be frustratingly unclear in specific cases. But from the perspective of enslaved life, the distinction is not always neat. Survival itself becomes political when a system is designed to consume you. Choosing your family over perfect output, your health over planter efficiency, your secret dignity over demanded cheerfulness. These choices carry resistant force whether or not they fit a tidy category. There are moments when resistance flashes more openly, a verbal challenge, a fight, a refusal to move, a group murmuring in dangerous agreement. Such moments frighten authorities because they reveal how thin the line of control can be. One person punished may produce fear. Several people refusing together may produce panic. Planters know their numerical weakness in many low-country areas. It sits in the back of their minds even when they boast. That fear shapes the sharpness of discipline. Yet most resistance returns to the quiet scale of daily life. A mother preserving tenderness, a father teaching skill, a youth stealing an hour, an elder withholding a truth from the wrong ears, a worker saving strength for their own garden, rather than giving every ounce to the field, a singer carrying double meaning in a plain melody. These acts do not topple the plantation overnight. They do something subtler, and perhaps just as important. They prevent slavery from possessing the entire inner person. By evening, after commands have faded and the quarters gather themselves again, the evidence of punishment and resistance sits close together, a welt beneath a sleeve, a whispered account of what happened, a bitter joke that makes somebody smile despite the day. Ointment spread carefully over torn skin, a warning passed along for tomorrow. Defiance rarely looks triumphant here. It looks tired, alert, wounded, inventive, and stubborn. This is what punishment and resistance really mean on a South Carolina rice plantation in 1800. Violence is not an occasional breakdown of order. It is the foundation under the order. Discipline is meant to make people fear every hour of their own bodies. But resistance keeps appearing because human beings do not surrender completely, even when the cost is high. Some resist by running, some by stealing, some by speaking in code, some by protecting kin, some by refusing inward collapse. The plantation can command labor, inflict pain, and threaten separation. What it cannot quite achieve, despite all its effort, is perfect ownership of the mind. You step back and see the rice plantation as the people in Charleston and beyond preferred to imagine it. A source of elegance, a machine for wealth, a glittering proof that the Carolina Low Country could turn swamp and tide into polished profit. In drawing rooms, rice becomes refinement. It becomes silver spoons, imported fabrics, brick townhouses, books on shelves, and wine poured into clean glasses by steady hands. In account books, it becomes acreage, output, market value, shipping, debt, and gain. In conversation among planters, it becomes improvement, management, and reputation. But when you stand close enough to the ground, all that refinement begins to look less like civilization and more like a veil. The true cost lives in bodies. By 1800, rice has made South Carolina one of the wealthiest slave societies in North America. The Low Country elite derives status and political influence from the crop's success. Rice money reaches far beyond the plantation itself. It helps build houses, roads, churches, wharves, and commercial networks. It shapes the social world of Charleston. It supports merchants, factors, ship captains, mill workers, coopers, and traders. A single field of grain is connected to a much larger web of Atlantic commerce. That is part of what makes the system so hard and so cold. Suffering in the swamp is converted into respectability in town. You can almost smell the distance between those two worlds. In the fields, the air is mud, sweat, hot reeds, standing water, and smoke. In a Charleston dining room, the air is wax, polished wood, cooked meat, perfume, and wine. The grain that links them is the same grain. The lives attached to it are not. One world scrapes mud from its calves and worries about fever by lamplight. The other debates manners, crops, and marriage prospects over dinner. Wealth does not erase the labour beneath it. It merely perfumes it. This is why the rice empire feels so morally revealing. It is not just cruel in the open, brutal sense. It is also exquisitely indirect. The person enjoying the results may never see the worst of the work. A barrel shipped out has no visible memory of the ditch that had to be cleared, the woman who pounded grain with swollen hands, the child who went hungry when rations ran low, or the man who shivered through fever and was sent back to labour before strength returned. Profit launders suffering into numbers, and numbers have a very soothing effect on conscience. The plantation house itself often performs this laundering with architecture. Wide porches, symmetry, imported furnishings, ordered gardens, guests impressed by the view. The visual message is control, taste, and success. Yet all around that house lies a world of dependency the house can never admit honestly. Enslaved cooks prepare food, enslaved domestics clean rooms, enslaved field hands make the crop, enslaved boatmen move goods, enslaved carpenters, drivers, nurses, washerwomen, and artisans sustain the whole apparatus. The grand house sits at the top of an invisible mountain of exhausted labour and calls itself grace. Historians broadly agree that the prosperity of low-country South Carolina rested decisively on enslaved labour and on a rice economy deeply tied to Atlantic markets. Scholars still debate some details of profitability over time, especially as soils changed, markets fluctuated, and other crops gained importance in certain districts. But there is no real uncertainty about the foundation. Rice wealth was plantation wealth, and plantation wealth was slave wealth. Every polished table had mud underneath it. You begin to understand how ordinary this contradiction seemed to those who benefited from it. Planters could speak tenderly of family while selling other families. They could discuss health while sending others into fever-ridden fields. They could praise skill while denying humanity to the skilled. They could give thanks to God for abundance while living from forced labour. This is not hypocrisy in the small everyday sense. It is a whole social order built on moral compartmentalization. The mind learns to separate elegance from violence because the alternative would be unbearable. Yet not everyone separated it equally well. Visitors sometimes remarked on the deadly climate, the labour, the swampy isolation, or the uneasy atmosphere of low-country estates. Planters themselves worried about disease, slave resistance, storms, market risk, and debt. Wealth did not create peace. It created dependence on a dangerous system that required constant maintenance. Even in comfort, anxiety lived nearby, a weakened bank, a failed crop, a fever season, a rumoured plot, a price drop, a creditor's pressure. Any of these could shake the smooth surface. The rice world made fortunes, but it also trapped its own elite inside a permanent state of guardedness. A curious detail appears when you consider how often white low-country families tried to leave the plantations during the sickliest months. They built wealth from an environment they considered unhealthy for themselves. That one fact strips away much of the romance. The people who called the system natural did not wish to inhabit its risks equally. They preferred to collect income at a measured distance whenever possible. The swamp was profitable, but not pleasant enough for full-time aristocratic devotion. Other people could absorb the worst of it. The human cost appears not only in death, though death is constant enough, It appears in shortened life, weakened health, maternal loss, infant loss, chronic pain, scarred skin, damaged lungs, broken sleep, and grief that never has time to settle fully because work begins again at dawn. It appears in marriages stretched across plantations, children raised under threat, elders buried in wet ground, and knowledge passed along under pressure rather than in freedom. It appears in the countless acts of repair required every night simply to make life continue. The rice plantation also consumes time in a nearly irretrievable way. Think of the hours, the years, the morning spent in wet fields, the evening spent mending and cooking, the energy used to avoid punishment, red moods, endure fever, protect children, and preserve memory. Slavery does not only steal labour output, it steals the shape of a lifetime. It takes what might have become craft, rest, travel, education, invention, courtship, and old age lived in security, and reroutes that human possibility into the accumulation of someone else's property. You can sense this theft even in the landscape itself. Banks, ditches, trunks, and flooded fields seem permanent from a distance, but they are actually records of compulsion. The land has been taught to perform wealth through relentless human management. That management left marks on nature and on people together. Rice agriculture altered wetlands, redirected water, and created a working environment hostile to health. Environmental change and human exploitation were not separate stories. They were the same story, told in mud and fever. There is also the matter of memory. Planter memory tended to celebrate productivity, lineage, and architecture. Enslaved memory preserves something else: the taste of thin supper, the smell of a child's hair near the fire, the sound of frogs outside the cabin while someone whispered a prayer, the pain after punishment, the relief of a fish caught at dusk, the quiet pride in a swept yard or a well-tied head wrap. These memories do not sit comfortably in public monuments, but they are far closer to the truth of what the plantation was. Historians still argue about how fully later generations romanticized the low-country plantation world, especially through nostalgic writing that softened labour and elevated planter culture. That debate matters because memory itself can become another layer of injustice. When beauty is remembered without bondage, the dead are cheated twice, once in life, once in story. The rice coast was beautiful in certain lights. Yes, marsh grass moved like silk, water reflected the sky, evening air carried birdsong across shining fields, but beauty in the landscape did not make the system humane. It made the contrast more haunting. You notice too that rice wealth depended on people whose names were often omitted, misspelled, reduced, or counted only as units. A ledger may list age, value, skill, and sex with brutal neatness. It may track births as increase and deaths as loss. It may note a woman's productivity and ignore her grief. It may praise a driver's reliability and ignore the impossible position he occupied. It may celebrate a fine crop without mentioning the community of labouring people whose knowledge made it possible. Documents survive. Humanity leaks out of them unless you deliberately look for it, and yet the humanity is there. In every part of life on the plantation, black people made worlds inside the world imposed on them. They built families where law refused family. They developed foodways, music, speech, healing traditions, and spiritual life under extreme strain. They cultivated gardens, repaired clothing, taught children, loved one another, and resisted in ways open and hidden. This does not redeem the plantation. Nothing redeems the plantation, but it does change how you see the people within it. They were never merely victims lying flat beneath history. They were workers, thinkers, parents, believers, makers, mourners, jokers, and strategists living inside one of the harshest systems early America produced. The rice plantation's wealth also carried political weight. The men enriched by this labour-shaped law, governance, militia culture, and regional identity. Their power reached into courts and assemblies. This means the plantation was not just a local economic arrangement, it helped structure public life. Violence in the fields was connected to authority in the state house. Private wealth became public influence. That is one reason slavery proved so durable. It was profitable not only for individuals, but for institutions built around their interests. As night settles more fully in your imagination, the whole plantation seems to divide into two truths. One truth is the official truth, the one owners wanted remembered: productive land, fine households, orderly labour, coastal prestige. The other truth is the lived one: damp cabins, mosquitoes, hunger, skilled hands in muddy water, children taught to be careful before they were taught to be carefree, women cooking after dark with aching backs, men carrying fever in their blood, elders naming the dead so they would not vanish completely. These truths occupied the same ground, but only one of them usually got written in polished language. What life was actually like for black Americans on rice plantations in South Carolina in 1800 can be said plainly now. It was deadly not only because disease and hard labour were everywhere, but because the entire system transformed human life into extracted value. It used environment as weapon, distance as disguise, and refinement as cover. It took skill without credit, family without security, labour without pay, and years without return. It made beauty serve brutality. It made luxury feed on exhaustion. And still, within that machinery, the people forced to bear it kept creating forms of life the machinery could not fully extinguish. Now the night grows softer around you. The marsh sounds drift farther apart, as if the darkness itself is stretching. You no longer see ledgers or houses first. You see low firelight in the quarters. You hear a pot settle into silence. You feel warm air moving through cracks in a cabin wall. A child sleeps. An older voice murmurs one last prayer. The long day loosens at the edges. The water outside reflects a pale moon, broken gently by reeds and slow current. Somewhere beyond the fields, the tide keeps its patient rhythm, older than the plantation, older than the banks cut into the earth, older than every claim of ownership spoken over this land. The swamp does not remember wealth the way people do. It remembers footsteps, humidity, birds at dawn, and the breathing of those who endured. So you let the harsher outlines fade now. The mud, the heat, the fear, the labour, the grief. They settle into the distance without disappearing. What remains nearest is the quiet persistence of human presence. Hands that cooked, voices that sang, arms that carried children, minds that kept memory alive. In the dark, those things feel steadier than the great house ever did, and as the plantation slips into stillness, you rest with that gentler truth, not the planter's story of order and success, but the deeper one carried by the people who lived, worked, loved, and survived there. Their world was burdened, wounded, and unjust. Yet it was still a world of feeling, thought, and endurance. The night air cools a little. The insects hum more softly now. The water moves on. You listen, breathe, and let the low country darkness fold itself around the last faint glow of the fire. End of script. Sleep well.